Every fire lookout tower has rules. Most are meant to keep you safe. But this tower had 6 rules that should never have existed.
At first, the ranger thought the paper was just an old joke.
Then he looked through the window and realized something was watching him. The radio turned on by itself. A voice came through the static, and suddenly, the rules weren't warnings anymore. They were instructions. Just before midnight, Daniel Carter began his shift inside the isolated lookout tower. On the desk, someone had left a strange piece of paper. There were 6 handwritten rules. No name, no explanation, just 6 instructions. Daniel assumed another ranger had left it as a joke. He almost ignored it until he noticed the first rule. Something outside caught his attention. Daniel slowly turned toward the observation window. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then he noticed the chair behind him. In the reflection, someone was sitting there, but the real chair was empty. Daniel turned around. Nothing. Just an empty wooden chair. He looked back at the glass, and the silhouette was still there. He tried to explain it. Bad lighting, exhaustion, anything that made sense. But nothing did. Then the old radio crackled. The light on its panel flickered, and a faint voice slipped through the static. Daniel leaned closer. The voice was barely audible, but it wasn't asking for help. It was warning him. Daniel grabbed the paper again. 6 rules, 6 warnings. And suddenly, they didn't seem so ridiculous anymore. One rule caught his attention. Never trust what you see in the glass. Daniel slowly looked back at the window. Something stood between the trees. A dark figure, completely motionless, deep inside the fog. Daniel raised his flashlight. The beam crossed the trees, but the figure was gone. The forest fell completely silent. Then, a wooden step creaked below him. Daniel froze. He wasn't alone in the tower. He aimed his flashlight down the stairs. Nothing. Just an empty staircase, disappearing into darkness. Then a shadow moved across the wall. Slowly, it climbed upward, but there was nobody there. Daniel stepped backward and grabbed the paper. One rule suddenly made sense. Never follow the sound. Never open the door. And whatever happens, never trust the reflection. Daniel slowly approached the chair. It had moved away from the desk. He hadn't touched it, and there was no one else inside the tower. But in the window, the chair was still in a different position. Daniel looked back at the glass. The silhouette had disappeared. For a moment, he felt relieved. Then he noticed something even stranger. The reflection was no longer copying the room. The radio suddenly crackled again. Daniel froze. A faint voice came through the static. Slow, broken, as if someone was struggling to speak. Daniel leaned closer. He couldn't make out every word, but one phrase was clear. Don't look behind you." Then the radio went silent. Something moved outside. Daniel slowly turned toward the window. Far between the trees, a dark figure stood perfectly still, watching the tower. Daniel raised his flashlight. The beam crossed the trees. The figure was gone. Then, without warning, every light inside the tower went out. Daniel stood completely still. His flashlight was the only light left. Then he heard it, a single wooden step, somewhere below. He pointed the flashlight toward the stairs. Nothing. He waited. Then another step creaked, and this time it sounded much closer. Daniel backed away from the staircase. He grabbed the rule sheet. His hands were trembling now. There was one rule he hadn't fully understood before. Oh no! The main door suddenly clicked. Daniel looked up. The handle began to move, slowly, all by itself. The door opened. Cold air drifted into the tower. Daniel aimed his flashlight toward the doorway. There was nobody outside, only fog. He waited. No footsteps. No voice. Nothing. Just an empty forest disappearing into the darkness. Then the door slowly closed again. The lock clicked into place. Daniel stepped toward it. He tried the handle. Locked. He stepped back and noticed the rule sheet was no longer on the desk. Daniel checked the clock. Still hours until sunrise. He sat at the desk and tried to stay calm. Then he heard something behind him, a soft breath. The radio came alive again. Static filled the room. Daniel slowly turned toward it, but there was no transmission, only one faint sound. His own name. Daniel looked into the window. His reflection stared back. Then, a second silhouette appeared behind him. Daniel didn't move. The figure didn't move either. Daniel turned around. The room was empty. He looked back at the glass. The silhouette was still there, and this time, it was standing closer. Daniel returned to the desk. The missing paper was there again, but something had changed. A blank section was slowly filling with fresh ink. Daniel stared at the new writing. He hadn't seen those words before, but somehow he understood what they meant. The tower was not empty. Then the darkness outside began to fade. Dawn was coming. The radio went silent. The footsteps stopped. And for the first time all night, the tower was completely still. Daniel stepped onto the platform. The forest looked peaceful in the morning light. He took a slow breath and thought it was finally over. Then he looked back through the window. Daniel was standing outside, but his reflection was still standing inside. And this time, the reflection wasn't looking at him. It was looking at something behind him. If you want to know what Daniel saw next, stay with us. Because some stories don't end when the sun comes up.